Barbara Sarah Smith, welcome to Unbroken.
Thank you. It's lovely to be here with you.
I'm so happy to have you here. This is part two of our series on addiction, One Cause, One Solution, which is your book that you co-authored with Christian McNeill. So I'm so glad to have been able to speak to the both of you.
Well, it'll be interesting to see how this plays out. So,
Yes. Yeah,
yeah.
I was just saying before we started recording for our listeners that many of the questions today that I'm going to ask Barbara are similar to ones that I've asked Christian. And I did that deliberately because I think sometimes from different voices and different perspectives, we can hear different things. They might just strike us in a different way. So that's the reason for that. So, why don't we begin? Why don't you tell us a little bit about your background and how you came to discover the three principles?
Okay. Well, I'm an MSW by education, and I have been in the field of social work in all different forms for 46 years and really loved it. I had a private practice for about 25, 30 years before coming to this. And I I really loved my work. I had a very full practice, very full practice. And But about 10, 12 years ago, I really started to burn out. I thought, I'm just not sure what we're doing here is really helping anybody because I was seeing some people for years and I just didn't have the same feeling. I wasn't showing up in the same way and that didn't feel good. So anyway, very long story short, a colleague of mine introduced me to the principles, or at least she introduced me to someone who she said could introduce us to this. And I was absolutely, first of all, very skeptical and extremely skeptical, and really no clue that there was anything that was going to be different than what I already knew after 46 years in the field. So I really didn't want to meet with this woman who was Annika Herwit. I didn't have any interest, but they wanted me to do it, and I thought I'd be nice and do it. And when she started talking about this and used words like wisdom and common sense and intuition, it just really piqued my interest. And
Mm.
that sort of drew me in, and it was 6 months of off again, on again. Mm, maybe not. And then finally, I think very skillfully at some point, she really recognized that something had shifted and recommended that I go for an intensive, which was the turning point for me.
Mm. Oh, nice. And given your background in therapy and social work, and you even ran a retreat center for a while, didn't you?
I did, yeah,
Yeah.
for 9 years, yeah.
What is there anything you can pinpoint that kind of helped you to flip the switch to see the difference between this paradigm and the pathology related one?
Honestly, I would love to know that myself. I
Yeah.
don't know. I don't even know why I stayed with it. I don't know. Didn't have the money. I
Mm,
did, but for some reason I kept going back to it. I think in part because I had to keep working, so I needed to do something, and I knew I couldn't do what I was doing. So part of it may have been desperation. But I don't know when the tide started to turn. I've thought often about. I think I still have all the recordings. I should go back and look at them because
mm,
something happened, and again, she recognized it, I think.
yeah.
But I
Oh,
don't. I
yeah.
don't really know. I just know it started to sort of make more sense to me at some point.
Okay, great. Yeah. Thank you for that. And so then we're here mainly to speak about your book, Addiction, One Cause, One Solution. So maybe share with us, how did that come about? Yeah, you knew Christian for a while, I guess.
Well, what happened was I was a guest on Harry Durbitsky and Greg Suki's website or um, webinar called
Hmm.
addiction, alcoholism, addiction, and the three principles. So I was on
Right.
that several times.
Mm.
And Christian saw me on there and got in touch with me to talk on her show. And we just hit it off. And I invited her to come visit me in the Azores, where I live part of the year. And she did. And she came, and we were like, well, I said something about I'm writing a book. She said, well, I'm writing a book. And so we decided to combine forces and write a book together. And it was really quite an extraordinary experience for both
Mm.
of us, that
Mm.
it was just seamless. It was seamless. We
Mm.
we knocked it out really in 3 months. We had a deadline because we were trying to get ready for the big addiction conference that was going to be held in Minneapolis. So we had that time pressure, but we just worked so well together to, you know, we both are pretty strongly opinionated people, but we just, were able to just feed off of each other in terms of really good suggestions and really good edits. And it just came together really quickly. I mean, it was really very extra. It was seamless, really.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah.
And Christian, in episode 2, she explained her interest in addiction related to her experience with alcoholism and then sobriety. So, what is it that draws you to that subject?
I've worked in the field of addiction for 30 plus years. Um, I came from a family where alcohol created issues. Um, and I blamed that for my mental health or lack of for
Mm.
many, many years. And I really, I love working in the field of addiction. I worked in a number of treatment centers over the years, and I'm a great fan of 12-step recovery. I love people who get it once they get it. And so, it was a challenge for me. But again, I was at a place where I thought, what are we doing? I wasn't seeing any progress in people.
Mm.
So I was starting to feel so frustrated that, is this the best we can do? I remember saying to some of my clients, well, I know you've done your steps over and over and over, and I know you've done this, but when do you get to the joy part? And they'd look at me like I had 12 heads, like, joy? What's joy?
Yeah.
So, again, I didn't really realize what was happening, but it was, I think, at a place where either I'm going to get out or I've got to find something different.
Hmm. Yeah. And you said something really caught my attention there about, um, blaming our lack of mental health on the past, what may have happened related to an addiction or something, some other circumstance in our home. Um, and I'd love for you to just sort of touch on that and how you see it differently these days.
Well, that's, I would say, one of the greatest gifts out of this for me, because I got into psychotherapy personally early on in my life, and really always blamed my mother's drinking on all of my problems. Um, my mother was an incredible woman. She was brilliant, and she was funny, and she was generous, and she was kind, but I didn't focus on those things growing up. I just focused on the several hours a night. She had a very strange reaction to alcohol. The minute she started drinking, she would just get mean,
Mm.
and she could be very cruel. And so I focused my attention solely on that. And it became the lens through which I measured my whole life.
Mm.
And so I really felt as though I needed a lot of therapy and, um, that she had essentially ruined my life with the way she treated us. And I was still really into that when I found the principles. I was still blaming her drinking and it was kind of hard to wrap your brain around when you were a kid, because when she wasn't drinking, she was just awesome. And my
Mhm.
friends loved her. But when she was drinking, she was really, it was mind bending.
Mhm.
She could be very difficult. So, you know, I focus my attention solely on that. Really, I over time, in some of my spiritual work over the years, I certainly came to forgive her more and more. And I could see her after reading like Women Who Run with the Wolves, that she was this brilliant woman who really didn't have a lot of options, at that point in her life. She went to college, interestingly enough, at Smith College with Julia Child. And Julia Child once wrote, if I hadn't found what I found, I probably would have become an alcoholic. I think they
Mhm.
were bored and restless and, so
Yeah.
I sort of got that, and I sort of gave her some credit for that, but I still believed, I truly fully believed that my mother had ruined my life. And then when I really found the principles, I realized that all my focus had been on what she had done wrong,
Mhm.
and that kept me miserable, you know?
Mm.
And once I saw that, it was like that was the lens through which I saw my mother.
Mhm.
It wasn't about all the wonderful things. And what was interesting over the course of years, different ones of my sisters would say, I thought mommy was stupid for drinking, but I had a great childhood. And I was like, oh, oh, you know, I was horrified. No, you're in denial.
Mm.
So all the psychobabble that went along with that kept me stuck. It kept
Mm.
me stuck in believing, when you believe that the feelings you're having, or that your entire childhood formation is due to what happens to you, it's a trap. And I was ensnared in that trap for my whole adult life
Mhm.
until I learned the principles. And then I realized, no, no. I
Mhm.
created a story about my mother's drinking and her ability, and that story was that it had an ability to ruin me.
Mhm.
And I carried it around like a big heavy ball and chain for my whole life, my whole adult life.
Mhm.
And then it was gone. Then
And yeah. And so what
it
do you
just
see
disappeared.
what do you see now about your mental health?
Oh, I think I'm probably, I mean, I feel robustly mentally healthy.
Mhm.
Even when you get caught up in old things that may come up again. I've had several periods over the last few years of, feeling depressed, but now I see that as an opportunity to explore a little bit more deeply. Like, wow, isn't that interesting? I
Mm.
remember a few years ago, I had a period of just intense insecurity. I don't know, it just sort of came out of nowhere. It seemed like it came out of nowhere. And it felt like every insecure thought that I'd ever had was like Velcroed on me on little post-it notes. And I couldn't shake them. They wouldn't go away. And it was just, I went down a dark, dark hole for a period of time. And then one morning I woke up to this insight. Ah, the problem isn't that you still have insecure thinking. The problem is that you believe it. And then it was done. It's like,
Mm.
okay, okay. Yeah. Yeah,
Right.
we all have insecure thinking at times. It's
Mhm.
perfectly normal. But I was, for some reason, during that time, just stockpiling it, or
Mhm.
pig piling it, pulling them all together, and they were sticking to me. But I do believe that that was the beginning of the end.
Mm.
So now when it happens, and I just did a retreat last weekend, and everybody kept referring to going down the rabbit hole of their thinking. When I go down the rabbit hole, I don't stay in the rabbit hole very long.
Mhm.
I go down and then I come out. it's like, okay, well, there it is again.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, nice. And if I could kind of say what I hear in that is that what you saw going back to about your mother was that you maybe innocently believed that she could have an impact on your mental health and your well-being, and what you later saw was that that wasn't possible. Is that a
Yes.
fair way to say it?
Yeah, it was because it was just the opposite of what,
Mhm.
you do in psychotherapy.
Mhm.
A good friend of mine who was also a social worker gave me a set of cocktail napkins one time that said, "It's all your mother's fault." And I mean, that is psychotherapy, that is we really didn't mean to do that, but we explored a lot about what our mothers or parents or families or did or didn't do that created our unhappiness. That was a major focus of it.
Mhm.
And I bought in hook, line, and sinker.
Mhm.
Hook, line, and sinker, obviously, for 40 years. Um, and that, seeing that that's not how it works
Mhm.
has been enormously liberating,
Mhm.
enormously liberating,
Mhm.
because then you can really look at where the truth lies in
Mhm.
yourself and in your situation.
Mhm. Right.
And that gives you back all the power. You've now got the power.
Yes. Yeah. And for those who are new to this understanding, that the way that we're speaking about this now doesn't mean that you as a child didn't experience the things that you experienced, correct?
Correct.
Yeah. They still happened, and they had an effect on you at the time. But what you're pointing to is looking at how you're moving forward, how your thinking kept you stuck in a way in that place. Is that a fair way to say it?
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm,
It certainly happened. I mean, there was no question that my mother had this reaction, but I would spend all of my time ruminating on that part.
mm,
I
mhm,
wasn't able to just shake it off and move on.
mhm,
And again, I think the spiritual work helped me to see her within a bigger context and be more compassionate towards her life, but I still believed that she had damaged me,
mhm,
you know? And I remember having that conversation with a bunch of my peers, probably a year or 2 before I learned the principles. Yeah.
mm,
So that's how long it had held up.
mhm,
It seemed so true
mhm,
because it was supported by the whole psychotherapeutic community.
mhm. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, of which you were a part.
Of which I was a part. Absolutely.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. So let's switch gears slightly now and talk about your book. One of the things that I really appreciated uh, in in the book Addiction: One Cause, One Solution is that you talk about variability and the ups and downs of life and how normal that is. So I wondered if you could talk about this a little bit more in the context of addiction recovery and what it means in that circumstance.
Yeah. I For me, I think in working with addicts over the course of years, um, anytime there was any kind of blip on the radar screen, or they had a bad day, or they had a fight with their husband or their wife, or they had difficulty at work, um, there became this automatic default that would take them to damaged goods.
Mm,
I have these what do they call them? Drawing a blank now, but I have these problems that I have because I'm an alcoholic or an addict.
mm,
And I used to say to people, alcoholics and addicts don't have a corner on the market on this. you don't, just because you're an alcoholic or an addict doesn't mean we don't all suffer from the human condition. Now, again, this wasn't within the context of the principles, but it just was pretty clear to me that every single passing mood got turned into, oh, I'm so damaged. I'm just, I have all these, these issues that are because I'm an alcoholic or an addict. And, I felt like I was trying to pry people's fingers off of that, and character defects. That's the term I'm looking for,
Oh,
right? So these
okay.
are all my character defects.
Oh,
And, so then the solution to having a bad time, a difficult time, a challenging time, um, was to do another fourth step, which in Alcoholics Anonymous, for those who don't know, is an inventory of basically everything you've ever done wrong in your life.
mm,
And as I would say to them, like if I were really down in the dumps, I'm not sure I would want to start digging all that stuff out. But that wasn't program. The more you could sort of self-flagellate around that, I think the idea was that that was going to make you better, make you humble, make you better in some way. And now, talking about it, and I don't mean to make fun of it, but it doesn't even make any sense. It's not even logical.
mhm,
So I just really can see that we all have bad days. And they're not bad days, in the program they call one day at a time. Well, if you had to stick, bamboo shoots under your fingernails for 24 hours, that would be a long time. But when
mhm.
you realize that we have bad moments, and I have a wonderfully funny former client who was just at the retreat this weekend, and she actually timed it one time. She went down the rabbit hole with her thinking and wanting a drink and feeling really, sorry for herself and whatever else was going on. And she timed it. She waited. She was she waited, and it passed. And she's like, "You're right. It did pass." So, the idea, one of the spiritual guiding features that I have and the quotes that I have all over my office and my home and everything is this too shall pass.
Mhm,
Well, I got that. I knew that was true. But once I learned the principles, I really started to see that this too shall pass because it is the nature of all things to pass.
mm,
It's not just words.
mhm. Yeah, yeah, wow. And so and we can rely on that, it's not
Absolutely.
just something to tolerate, it's a predictable experience.
Yeah. And so grounded in, all the wisdom that's been surrounding us our whole lives,
Mm,
like your grandmother saying, "Oh, things will look better in the morning."
mhm,
Well, they always do,
mhm,
unless you keep cranking out the same negative thinking, they do look better. They certainly look different, at least until all your negative thinking kicks in. They look
mhm,
different. You feel better. And
mhm,
I now have very physical, I'm really in touch with the physical sensation in my body when the thinking lets go, or the
mm,
place where it's caught in some sort of eddying effect of your mind. Some people refer to it as a thought storm. Um, once it lets go, it's like, oh, okay. Yeah.
mhm,
So there's a real physical experience of that in your body when your mind stops doing that and you just move back into it flowing down like a normal stream.
mhm, right. And it's occurring to me now too that when we like you talked about previously holding your mother responsible for your life and your approach, as you say, you have to pry people's fingers off that belief. And and what that can really do, it seems, is interfere with this natural variability and flow. So we can kind of almost make ourselves stuck, in a certain part of that stream, create a stickiness that doesn't need to exist.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. The stories that we write based on the outside in misunderstanding, keep people stuck sometimes the whole lifetime.
Mhm.
And when we can be open enough to see this, again, the freedom, is just extraordinary.
Mm-hmm.
But there are people who don't want to let it go.
Mm-hmm.
They
Yeah.
really are convinced. And in all fairness, I think, 20 years ago, I don't know that I would have been able to let it go either.
Mm.
So I don't know when we're going to be open. If I would love to be able to predict when someone is going to be open to hearing this and seeing this.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a
Yeah, wouldn't
very
that be?
lucky person who does.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So in another part of the book, you and Christian talk about subtractive psychology. And I hadn't actually heard that phrase until I read your book, which I reread a couple weeks ago. And I would love for you to touch on what that is and why it's central to this understanding that we're exploring.
Sure. It's actually a term I believe that was coined by Jamie Smart.
Mm,
So we'll give him credit for that. And it just really rings true for both of us, in that when when someone believes that they are broken and they're damaged goods, or they have a disease, an incurable disease, um, and there's all of this maintenance that needs to be done to just help you limp through to the finish line of life. Um, that's a lot of stuff on your mind.
mm,
Like I have, eh, not even an addiction, but certainly an well, let's stick with addiction for now. If you believe you have to go to this many meetings and you have to do this much stuff and you have to go to psychotherapy and you have to do body work and and service work, and um, that's a lot of stuff on your mind.
mhm,
And there's a lot of stuff on your mind about, again, if you tell someone that they have an incurable cancer, if you go to the doctor and he tells you, sorry, your scan just came back and you have terminal cancer, you're going to, it's going to be a long haul. I don't know that you'll ever feel better, and you're going to die at the end. And then you go back the next week and he says, oops, wrong scan.
yeah.
Okay. I mean, that's how sort of I see this, like
Mhm,
this constant monitoring, this constant um, sense of measuring yourself against someone else's yardstick, and especially the program. How many meetings is enough? How many meetings is too many? How many times should she be doing this? And you can't, God forbid, you would walk past a liquor store, or, go to a wedding where this, I mean, just like the lack of our ability to trust ourselves
mm,
and trust our judgment. Now that doesn't mean at the beginning of recovery it's a good idea to go hang out at a bar. I mean, that's just common sense. But I remember I had some friends once who stayed at my house. They were both in recovery. They'd been in recovery for 10 years or something. We had a half a bottle of wine in the refrigerator and they like freaked out. I was like, what do you think, it's going to like jump out and pour itself down your throat? I mean, they both had very stable recovery.
mhm,
So it's this sort of fear-based lack of trust in
mhm,
in this in our ability to make it through life. And once that starts to come off your mind, it creates a whole lot more space and perspective to see life as it really is.
mhm. Right. Yeah. Yeah. I just love that. And you personally give an example in the book about um, how this ties in with your clients asking what they can do to really get this understanding and how it sort of doesn't work that way. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. Well, again, most people want homework. They want doings.
Right.
As this client I was talking about a minute ago said this weekend, I asked Barbara for homework and she wouldn't give it to me, so I broke up with her for 6 months. Um, She's got a great sense of humor.
Yeah.
Anyway, yeah, I mean, we've been taught, like, what do I so okay, so now what do I do? I go home and I need to practice this and I need to try to have more positive thinking and I need to, and so when we say no, in fact, and I think this is really important. I used to really hate getting anxiety clients,
Mm,
which was pretty much everybody, but they would come in and they would have all these anxious feelings, these anxious thoughts, and they were in a great deal of pain. I'm not trying to, because I've had anxiety a lot in my life, but we'd give them. There's this big book in the field called the Anxiety and Phobia Workbook
mm,
and Panic, and it's about that fat, and and so you'd give them all these exercises to go home and try to do something about their anxious thoughts.
mm,
And they'd come back the next week and just be, I didn't do it. Maybe if I did it right before bed, and should I do it twice? Oh, no problem. We've got another exercise for you. Oh, okay, good. And then you go home and, oh, it didn't work. I just, I can't, oh, and their anxiety would ramp up because it was innocently a setup for failure.
mm-hmm,
Because there's nothing you can do about the flow of thought,
mm-hmm.
except to see it, see what experience you're creating.
Oh, excuse me.
Bless
Sorry.
you. And
Thank you.
so once you can see that, like, oh, I'm just focusing like I did with my mother. I'm just focusing on these anxious thoughts and I'm
Mm,
scaring myself with my imagination.
mm-hmm,
And once you start to see that you don't, there's nothing you can do about that other than to see it more clearly. And the more you see it and the more curious you get about it, the more it will show you, the more it will teach you.
mm-hmm.
Because
Yes.
there's information in that. The feelings that you have, the anxious feelings, are just pointing you towards some information about how you're using this creative ability of our minds with thought.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I love that you use the word curiosity. That's so great. Yeah.
What a gift, man. I,
Yeah.
I have to say that someone once asked a doctor that I was working with, who are the ones who are going to survive? Uh, I have I had chronic Lyme disease, and he said the
Mm,
ones who are going to survive are the ones who have good detox systems. Well,
mm,
mine is the ones who survive and thrive are the ones who are curious.
mm.
When
Yes.
we can be curious about what's going on instead of having these walls that we build up with our thinking about that there's a right way to live or a wrong way to live or convinced of our rightness. And certainly I had a lot of that when I came into this, a lot,
Mm,
40 years of psychobabble under
mm-hmm,
my belt. And
mm-hmm,
I was convinced, but and again, I give Annika a tremendous amount of credit because I wasn't that good at it. Just her patience at
mm-hmm,
letting me, you know, bang my head against that for months at a time.
mm-hmm,
And then eventually starting to see, "Hmm, oh, listen," you start to hear yourself and then it starts to fall away.
mm. Right. Yeah. Um, I want to ask a question now that's a little bit unfair, so forgive me, but I wonder if you've had any fresh insights about addiction and unwanted habits since your book was published.
Ooh, good question. Um, I don't know that they're fresh. I think they're just more peaceful, that basically we just want to feel better.
Mm-hmm.
We don't want to be in pain. And however you get into addiction, I know some people feel you only get into addiction because you have insecure. Like I've known plenty of people who are plenty secure and they got into addiction because they thought it was cool or so I don't know how we get in, but I know that we want to feel better.
Mm-hmm.
And I I get that. I want to feel better. It's the most normal thing in the world to not want to feel bad.
Mhm.
So I guess for me, when you realize when you just don't know this and you think that feeling better is going to come from circumstances or people, places, and things, you get derailed by that. And once you know this, if you're open and curious, um, in AA, they have a saying, or part of the slogan is how, which is open, honest, open, and willing.
Mm.
So if you can be honest with yourself and open and willing to see something new,
Mhm.
you know, there's no limit to what you can can accomplish and achieve emotionally and in your world.
Mhm.
So I guess that that's really, I mean, I just, of course we want to feel better. We want I have a issue going on with my knee right now. I just
Mm.
came from physical therapy, I don't want to feel pain in my knee. I want to be able to get in and out of my kayak. I, you know, I'm going to do what it takes to figure this out. I'm not that old.
Mhm.
So, it's the most normal thing in the world. But
Mhm.
when we jump in with this notion that you're sick and you're diseased and it's incurable, and again, it doesn't mean you can drink again. I really want to go on record as saying that. There are a certain percentage of the population who cannot and should not drink alcohol.
Mhm.
Just like there's a certain percentage of the population who are diabetic or who, have tremendously high cholesterol and dietary related. I mean, that is part of the wisdom of this. But once you can see that it's very much a part of the human condition to want to find a way to make yourself feel better.
Mhm.
I just have a lot of compassion for that.
Mhm. Yeah, me too. Absolutely. Yeah, and for all the ways that we try to do that and then suffer because we think there's something wrong with us and that's why we're doing that thing.
Yeah. And so then, again, then all the negative stuff, the character
Mhm.
defects, and, I'm doing this because I'm this and I'm that, and yeah, it's not a good way to feel better.
Mhm. No. There's a podcast I listen to, and the host is um, a recovering addict, cocaine and alcohol, I think mostly, but other things as well. And he very often casually refers to himself as, I think he says scuzzball or scumbag or something like that. And you can hear it when he says it, that he's being sort of lighthearted, but he really believes that. Like he believes that at his soul, at his core, there is something really defective about him that there isn't about someone who hasn't had an addiction to alcohol and cocaine or whatever. And I just always want to reach out and give him a hug whenever I hear him say that. Um, so yeah, I just wanted to share that that's kind of what we can do to ourselves when we feel that, or when we innocently misunderstand that there's really nothing wrong with us, and yeah, and we're just trying to feel better.
Well, I understand how that got started. Again, it's about, trying to be more humble and trying to
Mm,
own your stuff,
mhm,
um, not bad, not bad, but one of the things that I say a lot is that in 12-step recovery, there is so much wisdom, so much wisdom. I love reading through the big book and some others, I mean, it's just amazing. It just runs through it at its core.
mhm,
But there's also a lot of contamination, that
mm,
innocent contamination. But
mhm,
again, this notion that, you know, you're going to be more humble and feel better once you, start listing everything you're doing wrong or have done wrong. you know, so, there's a lot, there are some groups that are just awful in that way. They just
Mm,
really, harp on that, on everything, how screwed up you are. And again, the goal was, and their thinking was to, get you to see, how where this has led you. But I think there are much better ways of going about it. And I see the principles as a much kinder and gentler adjunct to 12-step recovery. Because we
mm,
certainly, with this understanding, do not have the kind of support that's available in 12-step recovery.
hmm. Yeah,
So, 365 days a year,
yeah. Pretty much everywhere in the world. Yeah.
everywhere in the world. Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Um, all right. So we're coming up to being out of time here. So I want to ask you if there's anything you'd like to share that we haven't touched on yet today.
No, I think that about covers it. But
Hmm.
thank you. Thank you so much for this. This has been great.
My pleasure. Yeah, thank you for wanting to chat with us today. Where can we find out more about you and your work?
I I have a website, giftsofinsight.net,
Hmm.
and I do work with individuals, and I love doing intensives. That's one of the things I would think I was born for,
Mm,
either with groups or families or individuals. And then I do workshops and retreats. So,
hmm.
but you can find all of that on my website.
Great. Okay. And I will put links in the show notes so
Great.
people can find that. Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Barbara. This has been so lovely.
Thank you. And the best of luck to you with your new venture.
Oh, thank you so much.
Okay. Bye bye.
Bye bye.